Now, while it is true that Russian influence has been resurgent in Georgia, it's also the case that in the past, a Georgian fellow named Stalin or Djugashvili made his way to the top of Russia and actually brought Russia in the form of the Soviet Union to the zenith of its power. And Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has fostered a mini cult or resurrection of Stalin, including putting his bust in the Moscow subway. What do you think accounts for the continued veneration of Stalin in Russia today? Is this a country that's really looking backward and not into the future?
It's looking into the backwards and then in different dimensions of that backward looking, obviously, because Putin has other famous Russian figures, tsars as well in his mind. And then, he's reconsidering his view of the history from time to time. But Stalin stood up the test of time for him. And I guess that's a very strong symbol. So where the taste of what kind of political leadership he craves for and then admires, and then where he sees that Russia was the strongest in that way, even during the times, when it was Soviet Union rather than Russia by the name, when Stalin was the helm of the power. It's extreme cruelty. It's a very hierarchical power. It's where Russia is at the center of this conglomerate of the countries as he sees it, where the power of one man at the top of that hierarchy is unrestricted, unlimited, and it can be free to exercise inhumane and brutal acts against its own people if it comes to retaining power and then positioning itself abroad and as well, to the degree that could be really unaccountable to the fullest. One of the gravest crimes of the Soviet Union have happened exactly during the Stalin's time. But it's telling that Stalin is not ethnically Russian, and then Putin is quite chauvinistic in that sense, so that he really must love the man, what he represents in that regard, to have him veneered to that degree, because otherwise, I'm sure he would have never looked to any man of different ethnicity, no matter what was the contribution of that person to the Russian statehood, but he's just stands above all. So he's one of his beloved leaders, and then that's quite telling where he is, and then how much Russian society accepts that as well. And then that's quite telling.
The one thing that's interesting, it is a difference between Putin and Stalin, is that you haven't had these mass purges in Russia. So to that extent, it's changed, or you don't need to do the purge anymore. You have the security services and you have control over social information, and that's enough.
He managed to do purges commensurate to his timeline, right? I mean, if you think of Russian business community and then how much it's cleaned up, the way how previously, in a chaotic way, but the oligarchy that the business community was emerging in Russia, he completely undercut the development, so that the purge of business community was not numerically as visible because there were not as many, perhaps, large businessmen. But if you look at that, how many survived physically, and then how many are in Russia, and those who still have access to financial means of that era, that they are subservient to the Russian state rather than have an independence of any kind when it comes to freedom of action. We see now people flying from different windows of different high-rise buildings as well in Russia, from state institutions, that be from the companies as well. So it's more targeted. You don't need to have too many people killed. It's that different era, but you need to have a symbolically important and targeted brutal acts as he commits, including against the political opposition members and including the media. Politkovskaya's case was one of that cases when he sent that chilling signal to everybody in the free media at the time that you can be physically eliminated when everybody will know that that's what happened, but nothing will come out of it. And then there will be no justice to the situations like that. But where we see that he is not shying away from the massive way of committing crimes against humanity, and I would argue as a lawyer of genocide as well, is Ukraine in international fora right now. And he doesn't shy away from that. I mean, it's quite clear that what Russia does right now in Ukraine is way beyond what crimes against humanity and war crimes, but it's genocidal in its intent as well already.
Before we jump into that, I'm curious, is Stalin getting a makeover in Georgia as well? The local boy made good?
With Georgian Dream people, he does. We've had only just a small locality, the city he was from, Gori, where the old generation could still have some warm feelings for him, maybe just because he was from that place and nobody else was ever famous enough from that place, so people still hold on to it. But from an older generation, even my parents' generation, I remember, was shocked when they fully got the information on what was happening during the Soviet Union. And this was the generation that was already, in national liberation movements. They were not really ideologically in any way prone to the Soviet Union. But the immensity of what was happening during the Soviet times, because Soviets were very good at rewriting the history, as they were calling that. So all this data, all this information, just step by step, but then flooded our societies. So Stalin became, for my generation already, and I'm born in '77, already a figure that we were ashamed of, that he was Georgian. And then he was a figure, one of the worst representatives of the Soviet Union. And then now we see that some members of the Georgian Dream, they don't shy away from him. They can actually speak of him as somebody that one could respect and one could, have in their Hall of Fame rather than Hall of Shame type of institution for the nation. And that's, again, very much a reflection of that culture from Russia. And then I have to say that there are representatives on the Georgian Dream that lived in Russia for a long time, and it's not just Ivanishvili, but then others as well. So their mentality is very much tainted in that sense of what is the sentiment in Russia as well.
Now, when we talk about Ukraine, and you mentioned the genocide that is taking place, is this indicative that this is not just a traditional land grab, that Putin actually has wider ambitions, which is to destroy the very concept of an independent Ukrainian nation, the language, the culture, and so forth?
I'm sure of it. The way, not just the way he speaks about that, and he's been quite transparent about some of it in his written testaments. I mean, if you remember during the COVID times, he had this period of his life when it's been told that he got all the libraries from the historical sort of archives and stuff, and then he was going through all of that. So he's obsessed with that. I mean, I'm sure, is really convinced that there's no nation as a nation of Ukraine. It's a province of Russia, and it's a dialect of Russian language, this beautiful language that people in Ukraine talked way before Russians were talking Russians, I would assume, in so many ways. And this is a very clearly deliberated policy from his side, that he wants to eliminate that notion that Ukraine as a nation is an independent nation, that Ukraine deserves to have its own independence and sovereignty. And then at the core of it, it's a very genocidal intent of full or in part elimination of ethnicity per se in this case, but and then the idea of independent Ukraine. Some Ukrainians say, and then there is very logic into that as well, that Kiev Rus predates what Moscow is now. So for him to claim that what Russia is now, is a heir of what the Kiev Rus was, the old Russia, so to say, in that regard. Christian Russia, as he prides himself in it, even though I don't know how much Christian is anything that he's doing, is Kiev. And Kiev at the time was not Russia. Kiev was an independent city, independent country at the time, in the way that it evolved in all those times. So Moscow is not the epicenter of Russian civilization as he sees it. And so he wants to claim Kiev as part of Russia in that sense. So in that regard, that's a very imperial thinking of a revisionist leader that wants to claim again the central role of the Slavic culture and civilization, if not the Third Rome, as it calls itself at times when it comes to Orthodox Christianity.
So far, however, the Russian objectives have failed. I mean, they are mired in a calamitous war. They're losing thousands of soldiers a day. The economy appears to be headed for treacherous times this year. How long do you think this can persist as it is?
Strategically speaking, Russia already lost. But when we say that, I just want to be cautious about our perception of not being self-indulgent, so to say, into that. Because while Russia strategically is losing, Ukraine bears the pain in the short term for Russia's genocidal intentions and revisionist policies, and then its vision for the world. And it's already fourth year that Ukraine is losing its best. It's losing a lot of people, civilians, militaries, and then it's being destructed at a very large scale. And it will take years and years for the reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine to happen. So when we say about Russia losing, we need to make sure that Russia actually is losing in the short term as well when it comes to the war. Because if we would have any hope of Russia re-emerging from this war in the way that Russia will not be almost imminently a bigger threat to common European security and beyond as well, in its partnership with other sort of strategic partners that Russia has, is for Russia to lose big time. I mean, it might not be exactly as it was in Second World War when Germany lost in the way that Germany lost, but that losing of the war was not just a blessing for the whole world when Nazi Germany lost the war. It was a blessing for Germany itself because Germany got the real chance of re-emergence as a proud, democratic nation that is now at the core of the European security and then one of the biggest contributors to it. And then maybe sometimes in the future Russia will have that chance. But if Russia's claim and that inherent hunger for imperial revisionism will not be really destroyed, and this will never happen, and Russia will remain to be a growing threat rather than a diminishing threat. And in that regard, Ukraine is exactly where it needs to happen. And after all the pain that Ukrainian people went through, we cannot say that Russia lost if Ukraine will not win in this war as well. That's quite clear to me.
And winning would be Russia retreating from the territories that it's currently occupying in Ukraine?
Full winning definitely would have been Russia retreating fully from the territories that Russia occupies, including Crimea. But if in the short term right now, and by the short term we can have different definitions of the short term, but sooner the better, let's put it that way. If the ceasefire and peace deal after the ceasefire in a meaningful sense is achieved for this war, it definitely needs to be clear that it does not legitimize in any ways Russian territorial claims for the territories that Russia might remain and not withdraw imminently. There needs to be a legal recognition of that, and there needs to be a recognition of the fact that in a peaceful way, there will be time in which there needs to be a framework how that needs to be resolved. And it might take decades.
Now, this even acceding to a deal with Zelensky would be a shattering defeat for Putin, wouldn't it? Because he has staked everything on defeating Ukraine.
Depends again, look how they play the game right now. If they try to be in a win-win situation, so they maximize the demands that they have, understanding that the probability for all of those to be met is less likely, let's put it that way, rather than minimal. So they make their demands so high that it is impossible for the other side to accept it, so that it gives Russia an opportunity to blame then the other side of sabotaging any possibility of the peace deal. But if a miracle happens and they get everything they want, then why not? They will then agree to that. But other than that, they don't want to make this deal right now, because in this current situation, if it just freezes what Russia gained in terms of the territory, and if it consolidates Ukraine as inevitably a EU member state, and then will create the security guarantees for Ukraine, and then potential of swift recovery when it comes to the economy, then for Putin, it's very difficult internally, politically, to sell perhaps what is it that Russia ultimately got after so much pain for Russia as well when it comes to its own losses. So that's why it's very, judging from the actions and then where Russia is and current actions against Ukraine that intensified rather than decreased from the Russian side, it's clear that they are playing more with negotiations rather that they feel that they are cornered to the degree that they would need to make any deal. And I guess that's one of the factors that I wanted to highlight. In my experience, Russia negotiates in a meaningful sense only when Russia sees that it's cornered or when Russia gets all that Russia wants at some point, or maybe 90% of what it wants, because it always asks for more than it actually wants. And then any compromise that we think that we made Russia to compromise is something that they were maybe targeting to begin with. So in this case, they don't feel that they are cornered yet. They do have their own support when it comes to countries that still provide support to Russia in terms of dual-use equipment or avoidance of sanctions, and then money still flows to Russia. There is not enough economic pressure that would really corner Russia to the table of negotiations. Russia is not squeezed too much yet for Russia to feel that we don't have any other choice rather than be serious about negotiations. So in that case, they play the usual game as they do.
Well, thank you. This has been utterly fascinating.
Thank you.
And we have to do it again in the future.
Thank you.